Hello, this is Stuart Nachbar with Educated Quest. One of the things that I get asked often about, and admittedly I don't know very much about, is ROTC admissions and military service academies. However, I've had the opportunity to meet someone who has commanded battalions at the Claremont Colleges and the University of Southern California, and is also a graduate of the United States Military Academy, aka West Point, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Kirkland. Colonel Kirkland advises students on the ROTC scholarship process, as well as admissions to the service academies. He has since he is a former military science professor, now a consultant on these issues, and we're very fortunate to have him join us today. Thank you for joining us, Colonel.
Yeah, Stuart, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
When should a high school student begin to prepare for admission to a service academy or ROTC, and why?
I would say that they should obviously prepare as early as possible. Similar to sort of regular college admission. The acronym that I like to use for this kind of process of preparation would be SAL, Scholar, Athlete, Leader. And so, obviously, with scholarship, you're looking at SAT scores or ACT scores, and obviously a strong high school curriculum with a strong GPA. Athlete, varsity athletics is really looked at very strongly by the service academies as well as ROTC. So athletic preparation, and then leadership, any sort of leadership opportunities that you can obtain that allow you to be able to kind of organize and work with other students or people and to be able to accomplish a goal or a mission. So obviously with particularly with the athlete and leader piece, you need a lot of lead time, in order to be able to get to the varsity level or to be able to, lead at the kind of more responsible level. So, if they can get going their freshman, sophomore year in high school, that can kind of increase their athlete leader profile. Now, as far as when they apply the service academies start their pre-candidate questionnaire now for people that in the class of 2025. So in other words, people that are juniors in high school, the application window to sort of give a candidate questionnaire is open now. But most of the applications for ROTC and the service academies open up June. So that would be when the junior gets done with their junior year, the scholarship and the service academy applications open up in the June timeframe.
So, isn't there like a summer experience that juniors should consider?
Yes, there's one for the service. All three service academies have a summer leadership experience. It's usually about anywhere from 5 to 10 days long. You have to apply, and it's the application windows open up now. So it's open up in the month of January and the middle of February. And yeah, it's a great experience for candidates who are interested in any of the service academies. So I encourage them to look at that. Just go to the website for the particular service academy, and it's and apply. You have to have a PSAT or an SAT or an ACT score in order to be considered. This year, that may be waived, I believe, because of the pandemic. But it's a great opportunity if you have time over the summer to do so.
Do most students who participate in those programs end up applying to a service academy?
They do. A lot of them do. They have a positive experience there. I'd caveat this by saying that the academies encouraged. In other words, you don't get an advantage by going to one of these summer seminars because the academies realize that students are doing other things over the summer, may have other great leadership experiences like, say, Boys State or Girls State, delegate, or another kind of activity. And so they don't specifically give an advantage to somebody who attends a summer seminar.
Suppose someone had a really strong intellectual interest that might be of value to the military, like like in computer science,
Mhm.
as one example. They may not quite be a varsity athlete, but they're physically fit. should they still consider ROTC or a service academy?
Uh, I would say that it's just my opinion is that I think you are somewhat disadvantaged by not being a varsity athlete for the service academies in particular. I think that they value and give additional points to those who have demonstrated leadership on the athletic field and have gotten to the varsity level. ROTC is less so. So I would say that if a person is just physically fit and not a varsity athlete, that ROTC may be a slightly better option. Although I have seen students get into the academies without a varsity profile, but I think it puts them at a slight disadvantage.
Are junior ROTC Civil Air Patrols helpful preparation for admission and early education to a service academy or into ROTC?
Yeah, that's really an excellent question. I was a Civil Air Patrol cadet when I was in high school, so I know you had that question. And you didn't realize I was a Civil Air Patrol cadet, but I had a great experience there, and it really I think helped me get into the service academy as well as get offered to ROTC. I'm a big fan of Civil Air Patrol. It's 1 day a week that you normally in the evening gives you kind of a great experience with kind of a military environment, how to wear the uniform. It's an Air Force auxiliary. I think what I like about Civil Air Patrol is that it's available to everybody, no matter what high school you go to. The issue with I think junior ROTC is great. The issue is that a lot of high schools don't have junior ROTC programs. So a lot of high schoolers don't have a chance to participate in it because it's not in their high school. But both Civil Air Patrol and junior ROTC are advantageous because they show a military propensity. In other words, a propensity to want to serve in the military. The other thing that's kind of neat about it is that when you're interviewing for the ROTC scholarship or for the service academy, I encourage all my applicants to wear the uniform during their interviews. And I think it automatically makes a positive impression on the military people that are interviewing them, to show that they kind of have that interest in the military and that they're already demonstrating that even before they enter an ROTC or service academy program.
In this case, living through a pandemic where students couldn't interact as much as they or play sports, how might that affect admissions for this particular cycle and maybe the next one?
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play here. One is the college board scores. So the service academies and ROTC this year have gone to what's known as test optional, meaning that if you are unable to take the test, you will still be considered for an admission to the service academy or to ROTC. You have to write a letter of affirmation stating that you were unable to take the test. So you have to show like a letter from the SAT or from the College Board or the ACT showing that you were unable to take the test. It's different from from a number of universities this year, obviously, that have created tests where they're not even considering the test. This is, I believe that there's still an advantage for both ROTC and the service academies to take the test, and it's actually highly encouraged. So I've had candidates where I've encouraged them to go out of state to take the SAT in order to be able to kind of get that advantage, because unlike maybe some schools, the ROTCs and service academies, they go nationwide, and they really like the SAT and ACT tests. So I think they are considering people that aren't taking it, but I think it's a tremendous advantage to take it. So they're sort of sitting on the fence, and it's not the best solution, but I don't see either ROTCs or the service academies dropping this test in the future. The second question is about athletics. And the way they've been doing it this year is if the student has been unable to participate in athletics, both ROTC and the service academies have said, if you would have participated in sports, list that. because then we, will take your word for it that you would have participated. So they are giving credit, even though some sports may have been canceled this past year.
Have the branches of the armed forces done studies? For example, I wrote about a college, Iowa State University, where in their institutional research, they had students with the highest grades and highest SATs. They were the ones that were most likely to graduate from their university.
Mhm.
Has the military done any kind of, for lack of a better word, academic assessment where they know that students who have both excellent grades and excellent test scores are more likely to, one, finish the education, and two, succeed in the armed forces if they decide to have careers in the armed forces?
Yeah, the service academies in particular give some advantage to athletic recruiting because the service academies are filling Division I teams in all sports. And so if you're a recruited athlete, it does give you an advantage to getting into the service academies. Now there's no advantage with ROTC if you're say a recruited athlete. There's no advantage to getting an ROTC scholarship. It's a very, very interesting question. West Point did a study on this, and recruited athletes to West Point have lower GPAs, get out of the Army earlier, and do not go to the highest ranks of the Army. The biggest predictor of success in the Army and a career in the Army is academic performance at the academy.
So, in other words, if they can get through the curriculum in high fashion, they're more likely to succeed.
Right. Academic performance is the number one indicator for success in the military. And so it begs the question of why the service academies have this emphasis on athletics. Given that athletes have the propensity to do more poorly at West Point and more poorly in the military. So it brings up the question of why a Division I athletics is supported at the academy when it doesn't add to the mission of having successful officers in the Army.
Now, the Coast Guard Academy and the Merchant Marine Academy, they're D3.
That's correct.
And is athletic recruiting less important to them?
Yeah, they're smaller institutions who don't have an athletic tradition like the service academies. And so, I mean, my thought is that all service academies should go to Division III and not have these sports. But obviously, there's traditions in the three major service academies that have created this athletic industrial complex, as I like to call it.
Aside from the branch of the armed forces, what are some differences in the admissions process between academies that students and parents should be aware of?
The academies have very, very similar admissions processes. They're all the same. The scholar athlete leader profile is pretty much the same. There's really not a lot of difference that I can see between the service academies. So you often see a situation where someone applies to West Point and say the Air Force Academy and don't have to modify anything that they're doing because both academies are pretty much evaluating the same things.
So even the medical profile would be very similar, like with eyesight, or if you have something that may inhibit you from being on a boat if you were in the Navy.
Right. Yeah, there are some differences. There's the medical process is called DODMERB, the Department of Defense Medical Exam Review Board, and that the medical standards for going into the military are the same for every service. So the general medical standards are the same. Now, what can be wavered, meaning wavered from the standard, is different for different academies, depending upon the needs of each of the services. So it's probably beyond the scope of this interview to talk about the specifics,
Okay.
but I believe things like color blindness are allowed in, like, say, the Army and Air Force, but not allowed in the Naval Academy because of the requirements of being on a ship and needing to be able to distinguish between colors. There's some eyesight differences. For example, Air Force, I think, has a more stringent eyesight correctable, like astigmatism and things like that. But that's really dependent on the service.
Um, Art, well, interesting. If, one of the things I'm curious about, once a student is accepted to an academy and they decide to come, is there a fitness program they follow prior to coming?
They have to take each of the ROTC scholarship applications as well has a fitness test, and that fitness test is generally push-ups, sit-ups, and a run. So usually it's about a minute or 2 minutes of push-ups, same for sit-ups, and then either a 1 or a 1.5 mile run. Now, that's evaluated as part of the scholarship application. The service academies have a consolidated test. It's called the Candidate Fitness Assessment, and it consists of similar exercises that I just mentioned, but they also add in pull-ups, a basketball, a kneeling basketball throw, and a sprint run. So there's a few other kind of tests that they do. Now, I would say that in order to probably prepare for admission and to get in, that once they receive an admission or a scholarship, is probably just to continue along the same vein as the tests that they took. Do more push-ups and sit-ups, run more, maybe work on their pull-ups. Women do what's known as a flexed arm hang. They have that option, so they don't have to necessarily do pull-ups, but they pull themselves up on the bar and hold, and that's known as a flexed arm hang.
Now, students who are interested in the academies, they have to receive a nomination from their congressman, their senator, or the vice president of the United States.
That's correct. Most of the high school applicants usually get their nomination through their member of the House of Representatives, because that's the most common way that you get your nomination. Now, in low population states such as, say, Vermont, North Dakota, South Dakota, places like that, Montana, places that have maybe one representative, it's also advantageous for them to apply to their 2 senators. Even middle populated states, it's also advantageous to apply to the 2 senators. Now, places like California or New York, Texas, Florida, there's a lot of people obviously competing for those 2 senatorial nominations. So that may not be, they may not want to bother to apply for the 2 senatorial nominations. But each member of the House of Representatives can nominate up to 10 students to be considered for a service academy, for each service academy. So in general, most qualified applicants are able to get a nomination, usually through their member of the House of Representatives.
And do they get a can they get a nomination for more than one academy, or only one?
They can get multiple. It really depends on the competitiveness of the district, and how many, how many students apply from the district. For example, there's some districts that may be near, maybe like, say, in the Washington, D.C. area, where there's a lot of, government and military people, where there may be a lot more competition for those slots, whereas other parts of the country that may not have as many maybe people who may be interested in the military, that may be less competitive. So it really depends on the area of the country and the number of slots that the member of Congress has. In other words, how many applicants and how many slots they have, and the 10 slots. So for example, if a person is a member of Congress and doesn't have their full 10 for each of the service academies, and a student wants to go to multiple service academies, then generally they will give that nomination for multiple academies. For example, for me, I was an applicant upstate New York, in the Albany, New York area, when I was applying. And there was a lot of people who were interested in the academies. And so my congressman said, you only need to select one. I don't have room to give you multiple service academy nominations. So I could only choose one.
Now, if a member of Congress, let's say, has had 10 people who are already in the academies. In other words, they were already accepted in prior years. Is there a limit on how many that member of Congress can nominate?
No, they can nominate up to 10 for each vacancy. So generally, yes, it's usually just, it's no matter how many people they have at the academy, it's 10. So 10 for each year.
Now, if a student doesn't have the grades to gain admission to a service academy or earn an ROTC scholarship, are prep schools like Valley Forge, which is not far from me, or
Mhm.
New Mexico Military Institute options that they should consider?
Yeah, there's several different ways that they can go about this. If they apply to the service academy and they don't get an appointment, the academy may ask them if they would like to do the prep school. So there's a preparatory school for each academy, and sometimes if they're an athlete, that maybe doesn't have the academic qualifications, or maybe a candidate who has excellent athletic and leadership, but isn't maybe needs some more help with say math or English or things like that, they may get an offer to the Service Academy Prep School. So those are actually on the Service Academy grounds, except for the Naval Academies in Newport, Rhode Island, and not in Annapolis, Maryland. And so that's one option, and that's fully paid for by the Service Academies for that 8 months prior to admission. There's also other options that you're talking about. For example, Valley Forge. Some of the other ones are places like Marion Military Institute, New Mexico Military Institute, Georgia Military College, Greystone Preparatory School, Hargrave Military Academy. There's a number of these prep schools that are also favorably looked at by the academies. Matter of fact, each association of graduates for these institutions actually sometimes provide scholarships to candidates who are worthy, maybe need some more academic help. They get some help to go to these schools to get into the academy the next year. So I think they should strongly be considered by college admissions counselors if the student has difficulty or isn't able to secure an appointment to a military academy.
Those are interesting. I've heard those names before associated with athletes who are in the NFL.
Yeah, they're what it is. It's a year prep where some of these schools maybe favor certain sports. Like there may be some schools that favor, say, football, for example, and then they usually play junior colleges, local junior colleges and things like that. There's other schools that may favor swimming or other type of sports that the academy is interested in. Having excellent athletes in. So it's another avenue for athletes to get into West Point and to the other service academies, but it also can be advantageous to somebody who isn't a recruited athlete, who may just want to get that year that's going to really prepare them for the academy academically in particular.
Now, I want to shift to ROTC for a few moments. Is intended major an important consideration in awarding an ROTC scholarship?
Yes, it is. It depends on the ROTC program. So for Air Force and Navy ROTC, they heavily favor STEM majors, so particularly engineering majors. So that's really, really important to have that. I think like anywhere from 75 to 80% of the scholarships are given out to those majors. So that's heavily considered. Army, on the other hand, does not consider the major in the awarding of the scholarship. So particularly if a applicant is not as concerned about what service they serve in, but is interested more, say, in becoming like a history major or a business major or things like that, the Army is usually the better option for them as far as securing a scholarship.
Now, is the ROTC scholarship awarded before many selective schools make acceptance decisions?
It depends on when the applicant goes in front of the board to be considered. So I recommend all candidates to compete on earlier boards. So the earliest board is usually in October of the person's senior year. So usually, actually, in almost all cases, that's before they get a admissions decision from a college or university. Now, the Army and Navy require you to list the schools that you are interested in. They give your scholarship based upon the schools that you list. The Air Force gives you the scholarship and then tells you what school, then says just find a school to be admitted to. Uh, so there's a scenario that could happen. You get a scholarship off an October board. You get, say, a scholarship to, say, Duke University as an example, and you accept the scholarship to Duke, and then you go through the admissions process and you don't get into Duke. In that case, both Navy and Army ROTC work with the student and find out where they've been admitted, and then work in almost all cases work to change the scholarship to the school that they've been admitted to. So it's not necessarily binding that, if you accept the scholarship to Duke in October, that if you don't get into Duke, you lose your scholarship, for example.
So the boards meet more than once?
They do. The Army and Air Force meet 3 times a year: October, January, and March. The Navy doesn't publish their board schedule, but usually they meet every month starting in October. If you don't get a scholarship on an earlier board, you get your application rolled over to the next board. So it's not binding. In other words, it's not, a lot of the earlier boards are more competitive. So a less competitive candidate may get a scholarship on a later board.
So it's kind of like college admissions right now. You have a bunch of applications that are, yes, we want you. And then you have a bunch that normally we'd admit you, but we want to wait for the next round to see if there are people we like more.
That's correct. Yeah, that in, like, say, there's only a certain percentage of the applicants that actually get their application done in September for the October board. And there's a lot of highly qualified candidates that apply and get their all of their things done in the October to December timeframe. So the ROTC does not want to give out all their scholarships in October and then basically then they get highly qualified candidates later, and then they can't give them a scholarship. So they sort of keep their powder dry, as we like to say in the military, till later.
Now, do students who begin their education in ROTC, whether they've received a scholarship or not, and they try the military science courses at the beginning, do they tend to stay in all the way to commissioning?
Well, the Army, about 50% of the scholarship, the people who commission don't go to the program with a scholarship. So they're what's known as on-campus scholarship winners. So I think it's less percentage for Air Force and Navy. I think it's more like about 2/3 of Air Force and Navy ROTC candidates come to campus with a scholarship. About 1/3, when they get on the campus, they have an interest in ROTC, and then they start taking the courses and are eventually offered a scholarship. There also may be some students that didn't get a scholarship off the high school board that then go to college and then actively participate in ROTC. And then when they do, they then are successful.
And if they,
So, mhm.
I'm sorry, if
Mhm.
they decide not to stay, are they obligated to repay the scholarship?
If they have a scholarship as a freshman, if they leave after by the end of the first year, they don't have to repay their scholarship. If they use their scholarship benefits after the first year, then there is repayment of the scholarship.
Now, has there been trends upward or downward in interest in ROTC?
It's been pretty steady recently. In the 2007, 8, 9 period during the surge in Iraq, there was a decrease in interest in the Army. Uh, However, the interest in the Navy and the Air Force stayed steady throughout the process. It mainly had to do with the dangers that the Army and Marines were facing during the war in Iraq. However, in general, since the war has concluded in Iraq, the interest in ROTC has pretty much stayed steady.
And are there predictions in advance of demand? Like some years, there's a need for more lieutenants when a class is going to graduate in 4 years, and in other years, there may be less of a need? Or is it just something that is driven by events?
In general, there is that kind of fluctuation year in and year out. There hasn't been kind of that fluctuation recently in the last, say, 10 years or so. It's been kind of steady. There really hasn't been any much up and downs, but there has been examples in the past where there have been drawdowns where there hasn't been as many candidates, that are needed. For example, after the Desert Storm in 1991 and 1992, there was less of a need for lieutenants or ensigns in the military, and so there was less scholarships given out. In the future, if there is either an increase or decrease in the need for military personnel, we may see that increase or decrease, but I haven't seen any sort of fluctuation here recently. This number of scholarships given out year in and year out, it hasn't changed much in the last 10 years.
And my last question for students who finish and are commissioned, have they been more or less likely to leave after their first obligation is up?
Yeah, most applicants for the service academies and ROTC usually only serve to their obligation. So it's not like, so having a career or staying beyond your first obligation is generally more of an exception than the rule. I'd put the numbers upwards of half or more don't stay beyond their initial obligation. And then, say another quarter of the ones that remain in don't serve to a full career, which a full career in the military is considered to be 20 years. So you only get that certain percentage that stay, for a full career in the military. We have a very generous country in the United States. People, say, well, 4 years, and it seems like a lifetime to these kids. 4 years, but they'll be 26 years old having their college paid for, and they have their whole life ahead of them. I'll contrast that to when I took a group of cadets from ROTC to Portugal, to the Portuguese Military Academy. And I was having a chat with one of the officers there, and I asked him, well, what's the service obligation of a person who goes to the Portuguese Military Academy? And he looked at me a little bit. He didn't understand what my question was. And I said, how long do you serve? 4 years, 5 years? He said, no. He says, person who gets a education on the Portuguese government is expected to serve a career in the Portuguese military. And it's considered to be dishonorable to leave, to basically the only people who leave early and don't serve a career in the Portuguese military are people who commit a crime. So basically, a lot of other countries, if you are given the honor to have your college paid for, that's considered to be your career. So we're very fortunate in the United States to be able to give our candidates such a generous scholarship for only to serve 4 or 5 years in the military.
That's interesting. I agree with you. You raise an interesting point that prompted a new question. For those who are finishing, do they tend to take advantage of a GI benefit? Let's say they go to graduate school, go to law school, go on for further education.
Yeah, the way that the GI Bill is formulated is that the GI Bill is a very generous program. It gives you 4 years paid education for serving. I believe it's 4 years in the military. Now, for ROTC or Service Academy graduates, the clock does not start for consideration of GI Bill benefits until after they serve their obligation. Actually, so it's 3 years for full GI post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. So in other words, in order to get that full benefit for the GI Bill, a person for, say, an ROTC scholarship would have to serve 7 years, because they'd have to serve their 4-year obligation and then 3 years additional to get the GI Bill benefits. Service Academy would be 8 years, because it's 5 years plus 3. So yeah, I mean, they theoretically could, but it means that they have to serve longer than their initial obligation.
Colonel, thank you for the time today. I really appreciate this, and I know people who listen will as well.
Yeah, great. Well, it's great to talk to you today, Stuart, and appreciate it.